If you grabbed a bunch of different RPG fans and put them into the same room together, you'd probably hear them mention some of the biggest names in the genre over and over again. And among all these titles, you'll probably hear the EarthBound or Mother series brought up once or twice. It's not really a super out there statement to confess that you enjoy EarthBound, and I bet every 12-year-old who mains Ness and Smash says the exact same thing. It's funny, however, that many people know who Ness and less likely Lucas are without even playing the games for themselves. This could be chalked up to the game series' troubled history here in the West, with it selling infamously very poorly on release, and only being re-released on the Wii U Virtual Console and the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. The series definitely did better in Japan, with 2 out of 3 games being exclusive to the region for the longest time. The prequel to EarthBound, Mother 1, was released in July of 1989, which was pretty late in the Famicom's life cycle, while the Super Famicom was set to release a little over a year later in 1990. The game sold 400,000 units in Japan, which was apparently big enough to get a sequel made, and they were extremely hopeful that this game would be big enough of a success to bring over to the West. It ended up being the only game we get in the series over here until Mother 1 was brought onto the Wii U Virtual Console in 2014 for the 20th anniversary of Mother 2. Mother 2, or EarthBound as it's known over here, is well known for being a flop financially, selling only 140,000 units in the US and only 440,000 overall, while other Super Nintendo games at the time were selling far beyond that. The reasons that many fans cite for the abysmal sales were Nintendo's lackluster advertisements, RPGs not being super popular over here yet, and the game being priced higher than other Super Nintendo games of the time because an extensive manual was included in the game's box, which forced them to raise the price. They definitely put a lot of work into localizing this game for Western audiences, supposedly spending $2 million on this localization for it not to be a huge success. Most of the reason people finally began to play these games is thanks to Smash Brothers for having Ness as a consistent playable character since the beginning. Because of this, the series has only recently gained notoriety and has a pretty sizable fan base now, even if Ness isn't exactly loved by the Smash community.
Ooh, you almost had that one. Literally, who are you? Who are you fighting?
I just want to say to any Ness main named Adrian, no one appreciates that I accidentally self-D'd and you just teabagged me. But I still beat you. Good luck next time, Adrian.
But what I'm here to focus on is the little things in these games, more specifically EarthBound / Mother 2. I haven't played enough of Mother 1 and 3 yet, so we're gonna jump straight into the second game to find the little things that are either changed in localization, or cut off from the final release, or even things that went unused in the game's files of both regions. And as an extra, we'll also go over often overlooked secrets in the game that even I didn't notice in my first playthrough, though hardcore fans may already know about these. Before we get started, I do want to say that a lot of this information was taken from the Cutting Room Floor website, and as much fun as it is to listen to someone just read off the site, I highly recommend you check it out for yourself. I also need to preface all this information about Japanese culture and language with the fact that I'm not Japanese. I'm just your typical, everyday white boy, just reading off the translations done by the wonderful Clyde Mandolin, which you should also check out for his book that he wrote that goes into more detail about this game's translation and censorship. With that all out of the way, let's get started. First, let's go over the major and most well-known localization differences among fans. An important thing to note is that many parts of the game were changed due to different cultural norms, any reference to violent or religious imagery, and for copyright reasons. This ranges from parroting too close to an original copyright, like the Monotoly building in Fourside being renamed to the Monotoly building because the localizers at Nintendo of America were worried about Hasbro drawing similarities to the Monopoly board game franchise, to even changing up some of the enemy designs in the game, like the Happy Happy cult members, to not draw any similarities to the real-life KKK. The latter was changed by adding pom-poms to the pointy hat, and removing the letters featured on the front of the hood. A slightly more infamous change to the game would be making Ness wear pajamas when he goes to Magicant, instead of having him appear naked. It didn't show anything too explicit, but it's important to note that going into a metaphysical world in Japanese media can often be portrayed by having a character appear with no clothes on. So this isn't exactly a new thing, but it doesn't make the scene any less jarring, but at least it has somewhat of an explanation to it. What's interesting is that there's an altered sprite sheet based on the naked Japanese Ness sprites meant for the US release. Hidden in the US beta of EarthBound has Ness smiling in these sprites similar to his normal walking sprites, which makes it weird looking back at the original Japanese sprites, in which Ness has a neutral expression on his face similar to the sprites when he's wearing pajamas. Like previously mentioned, a lot of things need to be changed due to copyright reasons. The Runaway Five's appearance in the Japanese version was apparently too close to the real band the Blues Brothers. This is because all the members wore matching black suits, which is apparently an iconic feature of the Blues Brothers, and also that they're called the Runaway Brothers in Japan, or the Tonzora Brothers, which just draws more similarities. I find it incredibly funny that they changed the color palettes of the members of the Runaway Five to not appear too close to a popular band, while Frank's boss theme in On It has a very similar tune to the beginning of Johnny Be Good from Chuck Berry, to a point where it's almost uncanny. Guinness World Records was also name-dropped at the very beginning of the game and On It, but was obviously removed in the English version to not get into any legal trouble with the brand. Another thing that needed to be changed was the red crosses seen on the tops of hospitals. The Red Cross Association has a trademark over using the signature red cross when it's used in a medical sense. This isn't even unique to EarthBound. A lot of games have had to remove references to the Red Cross before and even after EarthBound's release. The fighting game Skullgirls had to change the designs of one of its fighters, Valentine, in fear that they get a lawsuit from the Red Cross Association. Some changes were made because certain things that are commonplace in Japan don't really exist over here. Many of the ATMs in the game got their appearances slightly changed due to the letter CD, or cash dispenser, being written on them. This abbreviation is not used much, if at all, in the West, so in one of my favorite localization changes they did to this game, they changed the letter CD into this weird looking face that you see here. This change is only used in Magicant and Saturn Valley, while every other instance in the game is changed to ATM instead. Something that I think a lot of fans already knew is that the drugstores in the Japanese version have all been changed to say shop in the English version. Some remnants of the term drugstore still exist in the game, however. The sign on the shop in the Dusty Dunes Desert went unchanged and still has the word drugs written on it. Every other instance of the word drug was removed from the game, including on all the town maps, which just makes this one stick out even more. Similarly, all references to alcohol and bars were removed from the game and replaced with a more lighthearted alternative by changing all the bars to cafes and all the alcohol to coffee. This caused a few problems for the translation team, because there was obvious depictions of drunk people in the game, but they had to play it off as if they had too much caffeine. This is somewhat reminiscent to what Nintendo did with the milk bar in Majora's Mask, by kind of avoiding using any form of alcohol in their major franchises. But that's not a case of localization. It's a milk bar in all other regions, or at least something similar to that. One of the weirdest minor changes is that they slightly changed the food icon that appears on the town maps. The O's in the Japanese version are both lowercase, while the F and the D are both uppercase, which was changed to being all uppercase in the English release. Riveting information, I know. I bet there's one fan out there who is dying to hear about the upper and lowercase letters and is psyched to hear that I finally mentioned them.
Dude, the letters!
Speaking about town maps, a few of the town names in the game were changed specifically for the English release. For those who do not know, the first 4 towns in the game contain a number in their name, which reflects the order the player goes through them. On It has 1 in its name, Tucson is pretty obvious when you say it out loud, and then there's Threed and Fourside. This naming convention stops right after Fourside, but out of the 4 I just mentioned, only Threed is given a name change in the US, and is instead called Threek in Japan. It was supposedly changed due to Threek having a similar appearance to the phrase 3K, which might have drawn more parallels between the game and the KKK. This seems extremely creepypasta-esque, and honestly it seems like a little overboard by the translation team, but honestly I'll take the name Threed over Threek any day. The Lost Underworld also had a slightly different name in Japan, being called the Continent in the Depths of the Earth. This might just be a case of them changing the name slightly, with an American audience in mind, and not exactly censoring the name. A similar thing can be seen with Dusty Dunes Desert, which is called Doku Doko Desert in Japan. Doko can mean where in Japanese, so it could be interpreted as where desert, which similar to the previous example was probably changed only to sound better in English. The only other town that has a name change is Scaraba, which is called Scarabi in Japan. This name change was probably done for very arbitrary reasons, because I couldn't think of any reason for the name change. It's probably just another example of them wanting the names to sound better in English, but being such a minor change, it's confusing why they didn't just keep the original. A few differences exist in the UI of the battle system as well. Most notably, the PSI abilities are instead called PK abilities in Japan, which for some Smash fans might sound weird because all of Ness's iconic moves are labeled as PK moves. For those who don't know the difference, psionics, or PSI, is an American science fiction term for psychic phenomenon, while on the other hand, PK refers to psychokinesis, which is a different type of psychic ability that is closely related to telekinesis. So you might be asking, is there even a major difference between these two? Short answer, no. Both can be used interchangeably, and it honestly doesn't affect the way they function in-game. In a general sense, PK moves are often offensive attacks, while PSI moves are more defensive. Another thing that's changed in the battle system is the status icons that appear in the top right-hand corner of the character's health. These icons show whether or not an effect has been placed on Ness or any of the other members of his party. This ranges from being poisoned, having a cold, or uncontrollably crying. All of the icons were changed and completely replaced in the English version. This is because they actually wrote out the name of the effect, while the English phrase would have been too long to fit in this small space, so they had to use symbols instead. Another amusing thing to look through relating to the battle system is the altered enemy names. A lot of them were changed due to just how languages work, and some things naturally couldn't be translated effectively. I'll just go through a few of my favorites, just so that we can move through this fast. The black Antoid is called Ant Black, or Ari Black in Japanese. While this does sound weird, it does have an explanation to it. The term Ari on its own could be translated as ant, but Ari can refer to a term mahjong players use when they want a drink of coffee during the game. Ari in this context would mean that you want coffee with sugar and milk, but the joke is that it's called Ari Black. So basically what you're asking for is your coffee to be black, but you also want milk and sugar added to it, which doesn't make sense. So in short, it's basically a pun based on ants and a coffee term. This pun really wouldn't have made sense in the English version, so it's changed. Territorial Oak is an enemy you first encounter in Tucson, and he is named Big Wudo in Japanese, which is a real shame, they really should have kept it. Worthless Protoplasm, who you encounter a few times in the game, was renamed from What Do I Matter Anyway? Which again, they really should have kept that one. An already strange character found in the desert gold mines called Rope Man in Japan was renamed to Noose Man in the English translation, which is way darker, and I have no idea how this made it into the final game when they were so strict on every other aspect of the game. To get back on track, let's talk about some strange dialogue. A very minor grammatical fix was added to the text that you see after you've won a battle. In the Japanese version, it says "you win" in comparison to the "you won" message you'll see in the English release. This is such a slight change for the Western release of the game, and honestly, "you win" doesn't sound too weird at all. It sounds a lot like something you'd hear in a fighting game, like Street Fighter, but apparently it was important enough to change. The original release of Mother 2 had a strange dialogue scene where a man in Scaraba warns the player to watch where they step because Porky crapped on the ground somewhere. This was toned down for the English release and was changed to "did his business" instead, but was also toned down for future Japanese releases of the game on the Virtual Console and the GBA ports. It's a real shame though, it makes the scene way funnier and they should have kept it. Lines in the game similar to this were censored for future releases, and not just from the transition from Japanese to English. Future releases softened some of the edges of the game and toned down some dialogue, like Master Barf saying, "Get covered in puke and die." This line was changed a total of 2 times. In Mother 1+2 and the Super Smash Bros. Brawl demo, it was changed to "Suffer until you vomit." The Virtual Console releases changed this to "Get covered in me and suffer." These examples are all changes done for the different versions in Japan, while the English releases never altered their translation of the original line in any of the re-releases. The line in North America is "drown to death in puke," which marks one of the few times they're allowed to mention death in the game's translation. Similarly, after Paula is rescued by Ness, a boy in Tucson says that Paula kicked her kidnapper in the balls. Balls was changed to Vital Spot in Mother 1+2 and for the Super Smash Bros. Brawl demo in Japan, but instead it was changed to Crotch for the Virtual Console releases. Another line was changed for being too risque for a kid's game. The Hitman in Summers mistakenly refers to the Stoic Club as a strip club. Instead, in future releases he cuts himself off before fully saying strip club. Something that was always weird to me while playing the game was that the game will ask you to input your name twice towards the ending of the game, once in Summers and once in Tenda Village. The reason this happens is because the Japanese version has the player writing their name first in hiragana and katakana, and the second time it will ask them to put their name in English. These are both used for when the game mentions the player by name in the final battle against Gygas, and when the player is added to the end credits respectively. But because we don't have a need for writing our names in hiragana or katakana, we're asked to input our names and then verify the name later. Now enough strange dialogue, let's get into some in-game secrets. Something that a lot of people who even beat the game may not know about is the beachside house that you can buy in Onyx. I originally thought that this house didn't have any significance to it, but if you come back and pay for it later, you can go inside the house. The house is in shambles and is missing an entire wall, and the only thing of note is a magazine that you can find inside the dresser. The magazine contains a short story called My Secret Life. The story itself is very strange. It tells the tale of a man who's pulled over by a cop for speeding, and he lies to the officer saying he was speeding because his wife was pregnant and they were rushing to the hospital. The officer offered to assist in escorting them to the hospital, but in fear of being caught in his lie, the husband says that the officer can't help them because his wife is pregnant with a demon child. The story is strangely almost completely unchanged from the Japanese version, though it is strange they were allowed to reference demons in this story, while all other references to religion and the devil had to be altered under Nintendo of America guidelines. A more difficult secret to find in the game is the sesame seeds that are located in the Dusty Dunes desert that are exactly 1 pixel in size. There's 1 black pixel located in the northwestern part of the desert in an area of lighter sand next to a cactus, and there's also 1 white pixel that can be found just southeast of the black one. It's revealed by talking to them that the two of them are in a relationship, but they recently had a fight. The black seed wishes to reunite with the white seed, and the white seed wants the black seed to know that they still love them. Aw, this is really wholesome. Something a little less wholesome is the implication that Porky's mother is cheating on her husband in the Japanese version. You can find Porky's father in the cafe/bar in Forside, and he insists the player not to tell his wife where he is. When you go back to Porky's house, you'll see another man in the house referring to Porky's mother as a Miss and not a Mrs. It's more implied in the English version that the two have or are currently going through with a divorce, while slightly more implied in the Japanese version that she's cheating on her husband instead. Another secret can be found in the name of the bat item that you get from beating Master Puke. The Casey bat is a reference to the poem Casey at Bat, a ballad of the Republic sung in the year 1888, in which the title character Casey is in the middle of a baseball game and it's the last chance for their team to win. Casey, being the team's star player, is extremely overconfident and purposely doesn't swing at the first 2 balls pitched towards him. He confidently swings at the 3rd ball thrown his way, and he misses, leaving the story on a very unsatisfying note. This all comes into play when you actually equip the Casey bat. The bat is incredibly strong, but has a very low hit rate, intentionally like Casey from the story. Something that's not necessarily a secret in the game is the game's unofficial hard mode. This can be triggered if the console detects that you're using a pirated copy of the game, and it'll turn up enemy encounters to an extreme degree. The only problem with playing this way is that it's basically impossible, and it'll delete your save data right as you meet the final boss. The game does have a fair amount of cut content as well. Some pre-release content for the game implies that the main antagonist Gygus was instead going to be referred to as Geek, which is funny because Gygus wasn't even his original name. It was already changed from Gig, which honestly I'm way happier with the final name in English. Hidden in the game's code are alternate ghost sprites for all the 4 main characters, and even one for Everdred from Tucson. The Everdred sprite may have come from a scrap section of the game, where Everdred becomes part of your party, like when Porky, Picky, and King are in your party at the very beginning of the game. Maybe he would have helped you save Paula from the Happy Happy Village, then left you before you headed off to Threed. There's also some unused sprites of King climbing, which could imply that he would have been part of Ness's party for longer, and maybe would have helped you out in the first sanctuary location in On It that has a few climbing segments. There's also an unused item still in the game's code called the Video Drug that serves no function and only has a description that reads, "What the hey is this?" There's also an image that appears to be a fart sound that would have been used in Saturn Valley when one of the Mr. Saturns walk around. This is because the Mr. Saturns in the Japanese version make a poo-poo sound, which is actually the sound they make when they're thrown in the Super Smash Bros. Series. A flag and a beating heart asset also go unused in the game's code. The heart could have been used in some kind of unused cutscene or in the end credits, or could have been used between Ness and Paula at some point in the game. The flag is a little more mysterious in where it could have been used. It may have been intended to appear in Forside, due to the fact that the flag is split in half, and it could draw similarities to Forside and Moonside, but even that's a stretch. 2 unused enemies can also be found in the game's code by hacking. A crooked cop enemy can be found in the game that acts very similar to Captain Strong, another police officer boss in the game. A magic butterfly enemy is also referred to in the game's code, but it has no visuals or attacks linked to it. This was probably removed to not cause any confusion between the actual magic butterflies in the game that help regain PP, or maybe this was a planned enemy intended to trick players into walking into it. Think the fake item box from the Mario Kart series. Before the game was set to release in Japan, the game went through many delays during its development. During one of these delays, the appearances of the residents of Tenda Village got their appearances changed. In the final game, they have a dark aqua kind of color, but in the original, they had completely black skin, white eyes, and a monkey tail. This was changed for obvious reasons. similar to the Pokemon Jinx's redesign in the late 90s. There's also a series of unused music tracks in the game. One track that goes unused is a supposed dungeon theme that's a remix of Nintendo's Basement theme or the underground stream in Magicant. It gives off a very similar vibe to the One Fateful Night track from the game's final release. Another track is a repeat of Porky's theme, though the difference for this track is that it has an engine-like sound going throughout its entire duration. There's a lot of moments that this could have been used for. It may have been used for when Porky steals Monotili's helicopter, or for possibly an unused cutscene where Porky crashes it into the deep darkness, or during the post-credits cutscene as his brother Picky wonders where he went. There's also a track that features a loud rumbling sound and a strange electronic alert noise. This may have been used for when the Skyrunner crashes into Threed, but instead it plays a normal crashing noise. There's also an unused section of Bleck's battle music that has an ending similar to the Mario theme. Just to finish off this video, I want to show off a bit of concept art of the game that was featured in the Mother 1+2 art book. If any of the content in this video interested you, I really insist that you check out the Cutting Room Floor and the Legends of Localization Earthbound edition. These two are a major influence into making this video, and I highly recommend that you do some of your own research, and maybe look into some of the games that you enjoy and find regional differences for those. I didn't really have any kind of ending planned for the video, so check out those sites and I'll see you eventually.